Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Reasonable Doubt, brought to you by the Harris County Criminal Lawyers Association, the largest criminal defense lawyers association in the country. Glad you're with us tonight for another episode. We're going to be with you for the next hour. We've got some great topics to discuss tonight. I'm your host, Jimmy Ardwan. And as always, my co-host, Julio Vela. You are in protest, my friend.
This is the 20% shade protest I have going on for the 20% tax that's coming this way.
I know.
Right?
I know.
This is me. Hey, mi hermanos, vamos.
You don't want to pay 20 cents more on the avocados, do you?
Hey, guac is extra, man. Guac's always been extra.
Did you see that guy holding the sign out in front of Chipotle saying that?
No.
What? I saw it on the internet this week. It said, "Why do you charge for guac?" And this guy's protesting, why are you charging? So just, with all the protests going on, that guy was out there in front of Chipotle protesting why to pay extra for guac. Whatever. So
I will say, though, Mr. David Breston.
That's right. Our guest tonight.
I'm excited.
Glad to be here, guys.
Finally, we get you on the show. We've talked about it. I know we've mentioned it in passing, so we're glad you could make time to join us tonight. And I don't know what your normal Thursday routine is, but this should be some fun.
It's exciting. This is more exciting than putting down 5-year-olds.
Well, we'll try.
We are a show today of dads.
We are. Yeah, 3 dads.
Yeah.
Wasn't there a show, My 3 Dads, or something like that? I seem to remember that, but we digress, ladies and gentlemen. Of course, like I said, we'll be with you for the next hour. We've got some great topics to talk about. Some local, some national, some that people might get a little jacked up about. But please, we're going to open up the phone lines around 8:30. Call in, 713-807-1794 is the number. We also have Twitter up at HCCLA_TV, so you can send us your question and comments, and we'll take them right here on the air. But let's jump into some of the local stuff going on this week, guys, because we've talked about all the additions and subtractions going on at the DA's office. We get 2 big additions this week. We finally get a first assistant named. It's Tom Berg. And we get a head of special crimes, Ruben Perez. Now, for those of you who don't know, both of them come over from the federal courts, mostly. Ruben, who's going to be heading up the special crimes unit, he's been a prosecutor with the U.S. Attorney's Office here in the Southern District in the Houston Division for the last 25 years, mostly doing human trafficking. Before that, he was a state prosecutor for about 11 years. So he's got 36 years of experience both on the state and federal side. I've worked with him. I've had several cases against him over in federal court. I think he's a tremendous prosecutor and fair, does not play games, does not hide evidence. I mean, I can attest that he is truly one of the most honorable lawyers I have ever been against in a case. So I think he's a great addition. Obviously, I know Tom as well from being over in federal court a lot. Tom was a public defender here. He takes several high-profile court appointments in federal court. The judges often put him on some of the hardest cases. He's defending right now. I guess not right now, probably going to have to get off of a lot of these cases, but in the past couple of years, he's defended some of these sympathizing with the enemy cases, the ISIS cases that have come through. So this is a guy who I think, and he was named first assistant, I think it's going to be two tremendous hires for the office. I couldn't think of a better way for her to come in and really put people in charge who will be, I think, fair and do the right thing.
Do you know Perez or Berg?
I've had an opportunity to meet Ruben, and I've also met Tom with he's had some co-defendants on federal cases. I'm real impressed with what Kim is doing at the office. She seems to be hiring people that have a lot of integrity. Also, it seems like she's thinking outside of the box in terms of not just laterally hiring prosecutors who are from different offices or were there in the past, but she seems to be hiring people like David Mendoza, people who perhaps weren't in the prosecutor's office for very long, or who have come from other walks of life, or people who were defense lawyers like David Mitchum. She's hired some really high quality people. So I'm real impressed with what they're doing so far. I think they let a lot of people go. Some of those people definitely needed to go, and so I'm not sure about some of the others. There were definitely some people I thought were good prosecutors that were fired as well, but all in all, it seems like she's doing a really good job.
So what's Mitchum's role? Wasn't he like an interim first assistant or not at all?
I think he was interim first assistant, and now it could be, what I understand, head of the trial bureau, or kind of what that role was. I don't know if that's what it's called anymore. You know, the one criticism I guess we can't have at this point is no org chart. No organizational chart has been released, but I guess when you're still filling in the organizational chart, kind of hard to release one. Some of the other criticisms that I've seen online, some may be warranted, some may not. Some of the ones that I don't think are warranted in light of these two hires, I saw some comments when these hires were announced of Ruben and Tom. Of course, they were under anonymous comments. They were on some blogs and some of the news articles and everything. What is she doing hiring two people with mostly federal experience to come over and work in state court? And that rubbed me the wrong way. One, because Ruben had over a decade of state experience before he went over to the federal courts. And Tom is one of the best lawyers around. And both of those guys, as you alluded to, David, I mean, integrity. I mean, both of those individuals, that's one of the words used to describe them. I mean, you know, so it kind of is. And it could be sour grapes. It could be people posting this who are bitter. Maybe it's one of the people who lost their job. Maybe it's people within the office who were mad to see certain people go. But I don't think, and this goes back to my point from, I can't remember whether it was last week's show or a couple weeks ago, the criticism that came forth about she's hiring a bunch of defense lawyers. And that was almost a knock against her, that defense lawyers couldn't do this, when a lot of these defense lawyers had prior lives as prosecutors before they became defense lawyers. And so, look, she's never going to make everybody happy with the decisions or the hires she makes, but a lot of this criticism, you know, focused on the wrong people, in my opinion.
What do you think her idea is or motive is from bringing, not necessarily someone from the federal side over, but I'm 33 years old. I think both of these guys have been probably practicing law as long as I've had breaths on this planet. And
Ruben's been practicing law for at least 36 years. So,
and I'd imagine Tom Berg is up there as well. I was reading his bio, and so what kind of message do you think that's saying, and what do you think her motive was for putting the defense lawyer as the first assistant? Do we think we're going to see, I mean, what's her motive? Do you think it's going to change the perspective of the DA's office? I don't know. What do you, I mean, I think that's fascinating.
You know, again, I go back to, and David, feel free to chime in with your thoughts as well, but I don't think just because you were a defense lawyer, now obviously some people are going to get riled up by the fact, and there's already a buzz going around the office about Vivian King posting congratulations to another defense lawyer for getting a victory, and of course Vivian King is now...
That's awesome. I didn't know about that. That's awesome.
She posted on the lawyer's Facebook page, congratulations on a big victory, and of course now Vivian is in a supervisory role at the DA's office. So there's some buzz going around the courthouse on that. And so, yeah, maybe sometimes it's hard to take your defense hat off. But just because you're a defense lawyer, I don't think means you can't do that job.
But does it change a perspective?
Well, you know, I think it's an interesting question, and I think it really leads to, I think people are trying to re-examine the role of the criminal justice system in general. We've had kind of the same mentality. You know, I started practicing in 1997. A few years before I started practicing law, Governor Richards had built massive amounts of prisons in the state of Texas. And when I first started practicing, the sentences were considerably harder and harsher than they are now. And so the answer at that time was, oh, we've been too, light on crime, and so we need to get tough on crime. And so I think that people are starting to re-examine the role of the criminal justice system in general, starting to hopefully rethink what we're doing, whether people should have a criminal record. What type of effect does that have on the individual? Does, incarceration work? Does, getting a conviction work? I'll give you an example. Like, for example, the way that a prosecutor would probably think about assault, domestic violence, and this is probably still the same way that they think about that today, is we've got to get this conviction so that the next time that this happens, we're going to be able to enhance this and make it a felony. So, but on the other hand, you've got half of the time the complainant is recanting. They have difficult cases to make. I know we're going to get to the immigration topic in a little bit. If they're not a citizen of the United States, if they get convicted, they could get deported for their domestic violence conviction. And what are they necessarily achieving with that conviction? So I think they have to, maybe the district attorney might start rethinking their entire policy in regards to seeking convictions. Is that what we should be seeking all the time?
I agree with you. And if I was to change my hat and put on a prosecutor hat and go to work at the district attorney's office, from a defense perspective, I would probably, in assault family member type cases, I would say that, we don't need that affirmative finding of family violence attached to some of these assault family member cases. For example, you have a father-son, brother-brother type scenario where that affirmative finding of family violence doesn't need to go along with a plea or that's not something that needs to be sought in the appropriate case. And if I was a defense attorney and I put the prosecutor's hat on, I'd also feel the same way about small drug possession cases. So for example, a guy has 1.5 grams of cocaine once and twice, and then goes to the pen once and twice. And then on his third time, it's 25 to life. If I were to leave the defense side and go to the prosecutor's office, from a defense perspective, I would say, the minimum is 25 to life, and as a prosecutor, I probably don't need to put this guy in prison for 25 years. He very well may be in a situation where he needs something else, and prison isn't the answer.
Well, but you say that, but you've never been a prosecutor.
Right.
And neither have I. And I think that's the point that people are missing when they make these criticisms, when they lash out and they say things like they do in the comments. Because here's what I've noticed that Kim is doing. She is getting a diverse group of people together that have a wealth of life experiences in the law. Mm-hmm. And a diversity of experience in the law. And, I've never been a prosecutor. You've never been a prosecutor. David, were you?
I've never been a prosecutor.
So the three of us, we can easily say how we might do something, but I don't think we know for sure.
Right.
Because we've never done it. We don't have that perspective. And so I think you look at somebody like a Joanne Music who went back to the office. She was a prosecutor. She became a defense lawyer, and now she's bringing both of those perspectives from what she was the first time around as a prosecutor to what she was as a defense lawyer to now going back to the office. And I think that there's a good, that can be a good thing, because you're bringing in a lot of different points of view and people who have seen different things. I will tell you this, I have seen a lot of stuff on social media, on Twitter, on Facebook, from either judges who were defeated this last election round, former judges who are now out practicing as defense lawyers, or former prosecutors who are now out practicing as defense lawyers, And I know I'm going to get, there's going to be people who disagree with this, and this has come up before at other get-togethers. But I do believe that what I'm reading from these people, that their perspective is starting to change because they're representing people. They're not representing the state. They're not sitting there making decisions in kind of a vacuum with a robe on and watching people just come in by a case number. They're actually having to look at somebody as a human being and tell them, well, this is what's going to happen. This is what you're facing. And, you know, we've only seen that side of things, the three of us. We've only seen that side. So it's hard to say it. I always tell people, my problem is that I think sometimes that what I've done for a living probably in some cases, in some cases, would make me, for instance, not a very good juror because I might punish some people. I might vote to punish people a lot harder than some other people would, you know, because I've seen things that and had people tell me things on certain cases that people just don't want to hear.
Yeah.
You know, and so I've had that experience. And if I sit and hear the evidence, perhaps in a continuous sexual assault of a child case or some really bad case, I might sit there and say, you know what? I might draw on my experience of what I've heard somebody tell me before, and no, I'm not getting the whole story here, okay? And so I might read into things more and cause me to want to punish somebody more. And I'm not saying I would do that, but I could see how I would, potentially. And so I think what she's doing is a very good thing. She's bringing diversity to this, and a diversity of experience.
Yeah, I think she's doing a great job. I think what's important is that she, you know, really try and think about what her philosophy is in regards to criminal justice, and instead of tinkering with the system, really go out and change the way that we handle these cases. Once again, I'll go back to domestic violence. I think it's kind of the simplest case to explain. Most of my domestic violence cases over the past year have lingered for a year, and I've had to reset them. So many of them have been terrible cases for the state. In fact, recently I was set for trial on a terroristic threat where the complainant wasn't cooperating and there was no 911 call. But it took me an entire year for that case to be dismissed after having to set it for a jury trial. So, you know, we need more common sense and maybe a lot more pretrial diversions. We need to try and focus on changing people's behavior more than simply just having them, you know, having a criminal record. So I think that should be more of the focus, especially in terms of the misdemeanor division. Instead, you know, I think the office was directionless in regards to many different crimes. They didn't know what they wanted to do, and what ended up happening is people would set their cases for trial and ultimately they would just get dismissed. So they were wasting resources. I think that they need to focus on not wasting resources, making, you know, like she had indicated in her campaign, evidence-based decisions as well. But I think she should really think about changing the criminal justice system and not just being a manager of what existed in the past.
What do you, in your time, have you seen, what are some of the changes that you've seen through your time as being a lawyer? Have you seen people just coming in being managers of what was there, or have you actually seen shifts in your time as a lawyer?
Well, definitely in my time as a lawyer, the shift has been from, the shift is that over time, I think that the system was extremely conservative and it has become a little bit more liberal. But I think now is the opportunity. And I also think that juries were a lot more biased against the defense when I first started, and they have shifted, and now we're getting fairer juries and we're getting a lot more not guilty verdicts. So I think people are a little bit more skeptical of the government overall and more skeptical of the prosecution right now.
I'm going to come back to that thought a little, a little later. I want to drill down on that thought on something a little later in this. But we'll keep watching and seeing what happens with Ogg's administration. I think for those of you who think that things are changing, that things are just going to get easier over there, I can assure you they're not. It's business as usual. People are still getting convicted.
Yeah.
Pretrial diversions are still getting denied. Deferred adjudications are not being handed out like candy. It's not happening. But so it is still, the wheels of justice are still turning. I want to move, guys, to this Governor Abbott threat this week. Man, I tell you what, we've seen a lot of stuff. We joked, Julio, in the opening about your tariff protest here tonight.
That's right. That's right.
Really, it was a lack of finding a razor, but
it's been a long
but hey,
week, man. It's been a long. I keep saying, it's not too bad.
If
not
we
too
can,
bad.
if we can turn it into a silent protest against Trump, for you, that makes you feel good.
That's funny.
You feel good about yourself. But so we've had a lot of the, today, all this stuff about building the wall and the tariff tax. We're going to make Mexico pay for it, and so now we're really getting into. We're seeing some executive orders being signed. We've got a Muslim ban in place now on visas. So we're really seeing a step up on the campaign promises, not within the first 100 days, within the first 30 days.
Did that actually happen?
Yeah.
There's a registry or ban altogether?
There's a 30-day ban on. There's a list of countries that they're still going to process, but there's a 30 or 60-day ban on them actually entering the country until
all Muslims. Or from certain
countries.
Right, certain
I think it's Iran, Iraq, Syria. I don't remember the whole list, but right off the top of my head. But that was put in. I mean, executive order, and now our governor Greg Abbott has come out, and there's this whole debate about sanctuary cities, and he is now threatening to remove any sheriff in Texas, and he's starting with the Travis County sheriff and going right at her. That if you promote a sanctuary city in your jail, we're removing you. Frankly, I don't know the legal authority he has to do that, but I mean, this is just.
I don't even know what it's. Okay, what is a sanctuary city? I mean, we get it. Yes, sanctuary cities, illegals are here free and through the streets and front. No, what is it? What does it mean?
Well, I think I have a really good perspective on this. One thing I will say is, I do immigration law as well, and I will say that over the past 3 or 4 years of the Obama administration, there was really kind of a lack of enforcement. So you had people that were illegally in the United States that committed violent felonies that literally were able to just not have a detainer and get out on bond. So that was kind of an extreme policy on the one side. So perhaps some of this is a reaction to that. So I don't know if it was our sheriff that was not cooperating with immigration, but I don't think that was necessarily the case. I just think that immigration wasn't enforcing the law for a couple of years, simply because the immigration system just got out of control, and for whatever reason, they decided not to do that. So I don't know what Governor Abbott's statutory authority would be to do anything with the sheriff in Travis County, but it's just a difficult situation, because on the one hand, you've got people who have been here illegally for 20 years, who have kids here, who've worked here, and maybe never have been in trouble. They get charged with a simple misdemeanor like a DWI, and then all of a sudden they have an immigration detainer. They can't get out of jail, and then that sets them up for wanting to plead guilty even if they're not guilty, because if they plead guilty, they can get out of jail sooner. So It's a difficult situation. I think that it's kind of another reason why we really need comprehensive immigration reform, because perhaps if we had comprehensive immigration reform, the people that are here illegally who've been here a long period of time and have ties to the community could get some type of legal status here, and then they wouldn't have an immigration detainer. On the other hand, if you're here illegally and you commit some kind of violent felony, obviously, I think the public would want you to have an immigration detainer.
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea of the sanctuary city is, and this is what's happening in Austin, is that the sheriff has come out and said, I am not going to honor federal immigration detainers. Even if they tell me they have one, I'm letting the person go. If they're done with their sentence in Travis County, I'm getting them the heck out of here. I'm not going to hold them on a federal immigration detainer. And so the governor has said he's going to withhold grant dollars from the Travis County Jail, which, I mean, we know what the problems are here in Harris County. And so you're going to withhold grant money from the jail,
who's already collapsing.
Well, and not only that, but I'm sure the jail in Travis County is just like it is in Harris County. It's probably the largest mental health facility in the county,
Right.
and so you're already depleting limited resources to handle this, and so, look, I get it, like you were saying, there needs to be comprehensive immigration reform, but doing crap like this doesn't help that. Doesn't help get that debate started. It complicates it and makes it worse, frankly.
Well, I don't know what the process is in Travis County, but in Houston, in Harris County, one of the first questions I always ask to an individual who I'm meeting the first time in the holdover or in the jail is, did you hit immigration? And for some minor offenses, it's really hit and miss, because some of them, for driving while license invalids, there'll be no immigration hold and they can bond out. Others are on bond where you have no idea how they got on bond, because they should clearly have an immigration hold, but somehow got a bunch of money together and got bonded out before they actually hit immigration. So when someone's taken into custody, at some point, there's an immigration officer in Harris County that's checking names or checking a list. And literally, an individual at some point comes and meets the immigration officer. What's your name? What's your charge? And they'll either let them go into the jail to be processed, or put a hold on them and let them go to be processed and take care of their case. I don't know if that's the same in Travis County, where the sheriff is saying, I'm letting them go. So I don't know in Travis County if they're actually hitting an immigration officer at some point through the process, or if the guy just gets arrested and then at some point there's some other process that immigration can pick him up. Because here in Houston, in Harris County, immigration is down at the jail. And I have a ton of clients with immigration holds and a ton of clients who have no holds, who are out on bond, who very well have no reason to not have an immigration hold on them. And so as far as Houston and the sheriff being here, a sanctuary city, or letting people in and out of the jail based on their immigration status, I have seen some real lack of enforcement and standards across the board. And so I don't know how that's going to affect here. I know in the election race, our new sheriff said that he wasn't going to enforce or support a certain part where a local law enforcement is supposed to cooperate with the federal government. However, I don't know what that plan is, nor have I seen any difference in the sporadic disbursement of immigration holds on various individuals. I don't know.
I think the immigration hold, I think that determination is a federal determination. So for the most part, I think that it was the federal government that just stopped enforcing the law for the past couple of years. And in the past, I think just about everyone that was illegally in the United States would an immigration official would put a detainer on them, and then Harris County would hold them until immigration came to pick them up.
You know, I've seen some. I always have this picture in my head when I meet an individual that's in custody, and I'm saying, hey, you know, you're charged with A, B, C, D, and E, and I look at him and I say, what do you want to do? And he says, man, I've been trying to get back to Mexico for a long time, you know. And so I'm thinking, or Guatemala, or wherever he's from, and I'm thinking to myself, is this just your ride back? Like, were you all just hanging out and you said, all right, guys, I'll see you later, you know, and then drive, you know, and I'll tell mom you said hi, and just getting a free trip back to wherever they're going. Some of them are like that. There's some that are really like that.
They are. We got a call coming in, and I want to remind our viewers, we are taking phone calls. Open up the phone lines now. 713-807-1794 is the number. You can also hit us up on Twitter at HCCLA TV_TV. We don't have a call. We lost them. They went off the line. So call back. Call back, please. We've got the phone lines open.
You know.
Be patient. Be patient. It's 8:31. We open it up at 8:30.
From what I understand, though, is the denial of funds will be in response to not like seeking and looking for papers or status during like patrol. From what I understand, that's the rub.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. That would be a tragedy, because then that would deter people from reporting crimes. I think it's more along the lines of cooperating with immigration when people are in jail is probably what they're looking for.
That was a big concern that where it will inhibit individuals from just calling the police for crime if they feel that could possibly get them deported.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, and here's the problem over in the federal court system, we see a lot of prosecutions, especially down in the valley, for illegal reentries. Just a ton of it. And as you alluded to earlier, David, when talking about the administration and some of these domestic violence cases about the immigration consequences, I mean, we see people get convicted of this stuff, they get deported, but guess what? Their family's here. You know, their entire family is here. Their kids are here. Their kids are citizens, and so there's that natural draw to come back. And so then what happens? They've pled guilty to a misdemeanor charge of some sort. They get deported because of it, and now they're about to get popped for a federal offense of illegal reentry when they come back just to be with their families. So.
Did you see the sheriff on the news today in Sugar Land or Fort Bend?
No.
He posted 15 mugs of Colombians, and this group of 15 individuals are alleged to have been involved and or have pled guilty to or under investigation for something like 100 theft crimes and crimes against people and property. And he put all their mugs and had this huge press conference and said, build that wall. Because a number of them have been deported and come back. I think one of them was as recent as 2014. One of the individuals had ties to terrorism, supposedly. But it's definitely an issue and a problem. I mean.
Yeah, it is a problem. And as criminal defense lawyers, we definitely need to try and protect our clients from having a conviction, but also as far as the policy from the district attorney's office is concerned, I would hope that they would start to think about giving people who are charged with domestic violence or possession of less than a gram or other crimes, at least if it's their first time, kind of give more and more people a chance to avoid a conviction because it has such a devastating consequences for them. It seems like they are definitely more open to pretrial diversions for possession of drugs, for possession of small quantities of drugs. But I would hope that they would start having that type of policy towards domestic violence and other issues as well. because not only it's creating such a huge problem for our criminal justice system, because we've got people who've been here the majority of their life, they're getting deported, and then of course they're going to come back because they have absolutely nothing in Mexico or Central America. They've got nothing to go to, no way to support themselves. So they're going to come back, and then they're going to get arrested again, and they're going to get deported again, and eventually they're going to get put in federal prison for illegally re-entering the country. So it just creates almost a cycle of crime. It's almost as if by prosecuting the crime, or by if we can divert these people, instead of putting them in a position where they're going to have a criminal record, they almost have a lower chance of reoffending in the future. So I hope that they start to think that way, and that's kind of the benefit to bringing some people from outside the system. But hopefully they can start thinking that way, so that maybe have these pretrial diversion programs be very challenging and rigorous, maybe even more challenging than what people would have to do on a probation, but the reward would be not having a criminal record.
One of the things when we're talking to a prosecutor, or that I've experienced, is when an individual who's maybe been here their whole entire life, their whole family's here, they work here, they pay their taxes, they were brought over when they were 2 and now they're 45. And they get caught up in some mix where it's an assault family member, let's say. And we apply for the pretrial diversion, and the prosecutor's office says, well, why should I give him a pretrial diversion? And you look him in the eye and you say, because if this will get him deported, this will destroy him and go away, and it will hurt him just as much and maybe even more than a citizen or the common man.
And their response is, well, why should we treat someone who's not a citizen of the United States better than how we would treat someone who is a citizen of the United States? I mean, that's been the party line for years and years and years. So my response to that would be, treat everyone equally, give them an opportunity to not have a conviction on their record. I mean, the way that the system now is working now is kind of ridiculous, in that if you are lucky enough that your girlfriend or spouse happens to recant, then you probably have a really, really good chance of not getting convicted if there's not a lot of physical evidence. Or if you're lucky enough to where, for some reason, the 911 call doesn't exist, or for some reason the police weren't smart enough to take photographs on their cell phone, then, and your spouse or girlfriend recants, you have a really good chance of being found not guilty if you hire a good lawyer. So it's a little bit, we really need to turn the criminal justice system upside down and re-examine from the ground up what's going on. The other thing that has been going on for years, I don't know when this started. When I first started practicing law, the entire penal code was open. Class C misdemeanors were open for discussion. And for some reason, it's become the gospel that we can't reduce a DWI to reckless driving, or we can't reduce this to a Class C misdemeanor. We can't reduce this to Class C disorderly conduct. Many of those Class C offenses don't have the same immigration consequences that the higher Class A and Class B offenses do. So, maybe the district attorney can open up the penal code again and realize that there's a whole assortment of Class C misdemeanors that people could be convicted of. Perhaps, people with some real world experience could realize that maybe we could have them take a class for 18 weeks, and then at the end of 18 weeks we can reduce this offense to a Class C misdemeanor. In some sense, that works really well, because you've redirected the individual in terms of they've taken the same programs or same classes that they would have taken while being on probation, and you've preserved the record for the state so that the state is aware that this person was previously charged with assault or whatever other misdemeanor, and it was reduced to a Class C misdemeanor. So you kind of have, it's a win-win type of situation, and you've used your common sense. But for some reason, because the district attorney's office maybe was filled with people that didn't have a lot of real life experience outside of being prosecutors, then they didn't realize that that might be a wise option.
Well, I think it's more than that. And I stumbled across a website. I don't know if I stumbled across it, but
Just surfing?
you know, my nightly surfing ritual. But it's guiltypleaproblem.org. And you talk about, David, getting caught in the cycle with this thing. And it's an interesting website because it talks about the problems that we're having that we've talked about on this show before, where people plead guilty just to get out of jail, or you know, they end up pleading guilty to an offense that they're not guilty of. The site is interesting because it has a few testimonials, but one of the facts that it had on it is that the Innocence Project has looked at 375 exonerations in, I believe it was murder cases, where DNA was used, and 11% of those, you know, like 11% of those crimes, the person didn't, the DNA exonerated them, fully exonerated them, and they had pled to these crimes. And you know, the interesting thing here to me is they talk about, there's a federal judge on here, Jed Rakoff out of New York, who talks about how he was consistently seeing this problem. And I think to your point, your last point that you made, one of the things that he alludes to in here is just the overwhelming amount of power that has been given to prosecutors in charging decisions, that they're not exercising discretion, that they are told by their superiors, go for the highest charge you possibly can against somebody. You know, go for the charge that either pile on as many charges as you can that you could theoretically make, or go for the ones that have the highest level of time. In the federal courts, we have a number of crimes that carry mandatory minimums of 5, 10, 15, 20 years, sometimes more. And that's for a first-time offense. You know, that's just, if you, right out of the gate you pick up this crime, you could be subject to a decade in prison on your first offense. In state court, it gets a little, you know, the mandatory minimums get a little, you have to actually have done some stuff in your past and been convicted, but you have that persistent problem of people getting caught in this vicious cycle because, you know, you look at a guy, and I want to get your thoughts on this, David, because you mentioned earlier in the program, and this is one of the points I want to come back to, about how you think juries are getting fairer, and the pendulum may starting to swing. But this site makes the point that the reason so many people plead guilty to crimes they didn't commit, or perhaps don't look at it and say, well, you know, I'm going to take a lesser sentence rather than take my chances at trials, because they have no faith that the jury system is going to exonerate them or acquit them.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of factors. I think, you know, the economic factor is really huge. You know, how many times can you miss work to go sit in court for 2 or 3 hours waiting for your lawyer to show up and then have your case reset? Every time you do that, it costs you money. You end up getting in trouble with your employer. It puts a tremendous amount of strain and stress on you. And Harris County is you know, for some reason they're addicted to making people appear in court when so many of these court appearances are meaningless. Instead of trusting the lawyers to try and resolve the case and then having those clients show up when it's time to either plead or set the case for a jury trial, we have the system where we like purposely force people to come back to court every 2 weeks, every 4 weeks. That in and of itself is a tremendous burden for them. That pushes them into pleading. I'll give you another example. You know, coming back to immigration, I have a DWI I was set for trial this week. My client's illegal. It's a really shoddy investigation. It was in Pasadena. The police officers pulled my client over for going into the other lane. They pulled him over. They talked to him for a little bit. They have a video of that. There's no audio to it. I assume that they talked to him in Spanish, but then the DWI police officer showed up. He didn't speak any Spanish. He gave my client one test, the horizontal gaze nystagmus test, and then couldn't give him any other tests because he didn't speak Spanish. Threw him down, took him to the station, and real quickly gave him the breath test. I don't think that they waited 15 minutes before giving him the breath test, so I think that there's an issue in terms of admitting the breath test. And I think they've got real problems with that case. He's illegal, and I've tried to push for it to get dismissed, but the judge, doesn't want to spend 2 days with a translator, so the judge is offering him time served. So this guy's illegal. If he ends up accepting a deal, he's going to end up, if he ends up taking a trial, if he loses, he'll probably get probation for a year. But then while he's on probation, there's a risk that immigration could come to one of his probation meetings and grab him.
Sure.
So that's a pressure. So what do? Do you take the fine and just walk away paying a couple $100s and have a DWI conviction? Or do you take the risk of having a jury trial where you might win, but if you lose, you might get probation, and even though you got probation, you might get deported. The other issue is we've got a lot of criminal defense lawyers that you got a situation where your client pays you, and then maybe the state's case isn't that great, but your client can't afford to pay you any more money. And so the criminal defense lawyer will push their client into taking a plea because the client doesn't have any more resources to pay the lawyer to do a trial. So that's kind of a real big problem. And like you said, certainly clients are scared of a trial, but I think the key is for the criminal defense lawyers to stand, firm and to try all the cases that need to be tried. I think that's the biggest problem with the system, is that people who don't have money, their lawyers are not willing to fight the cases. And instead, the lawyers need to subscribe to a different model, and that is holding the state to their burden, and realize that our job is not just a business, it's a profession. And we are, we took an oath to defend our clients. And so that means that we have to try cases even when we're not paid to try those cases.
Yeah, but look, I think the problem comes from this ability of a prosecutor to overcharge a case in a lot of instances, and their complete authority. How ridiculous is it that the state has a right to a jury trial in the state of Texas? That's just dumb. I don't understand how that's even the law, but whatever. But for instance, on a 25 to life case, let's say, and the prosecutor comes to your client comes to you and offers you for your client to take 5, or risk, if you get convicted at trial, it's a minimum of 25. And what if it is a somewhat defensible case? It's defensible, but how winnable is it? It's one thing to say, well, I've got some great impeachment evidence, whether or not, let's just say it's a drug case where he's 25 to life, okay? And the issue is whether or not, you've got some good stuff on whether or not he actually possessed, where you got the issue of, because in possession, they have to prove care, custody, control, and management, right?
Actual.
Right. And so, that can become an issue, a legal issue. But that's sometimes threading the needle, as they say, to really go on a very finite issue such as that, okay, where you're kind of conceding, hey, we're just focusing on this issue, and that's our trial issue. And is a jury going to understand that? Are you going to be able to what are the odds that 12 people in Harris County are going to care and understand about actual care, custody, control, or management on this case? And your client's sitting there and they come to him and say, and the state knows this, and so they offer your client 5 because they know, yeah, we got a pretty weak case on this, so we'll offer you 5. And your client's like, well, man, if I go to trial and we lose that argument, I'm going down for 25. But you know in your heart it's a good legal argument, but so it's defensible, but how winnable is it? And that's the hard part to look in, and so and that's the issue that this website focuses on, is you've got people that, they have defensible issues in their case, and factually maybe they didn't actually have care, custody, and control of management of the drugs, but the state came to them with all their might and said, instead of 25, man, if you go to trial, you're risking 25. We'll offer you 5 right now if you take it. You're mitigating. You're mitigating your damages, as they would say in civil court.
I think that's a great point. And, I think that the other problem with Harris County historically has been this idea that, we'll just carry that motion with the trial. There's this huge idea that, we'll just carry that motion to suppress with trial, instead of letting people litigate their issues, like, for example, is this breath test admissible in my DWI case? For me to find out, I've got to do the jury trial. So why don't, but the nice thing about the Texas judicial system is that the juries get to decide on the admissibility of evidence. And in so many jurisdictions, including the federal jurisdiction, juries don't get to decide on admissibility. So you can sometimes 12 people, might find that the evidence is inadmissible when a judge won't. But yeah, we've had very, very conservative, courts of criminal appeals. We've had very conservative judges that have, for the most part, been a rubber stamp for the state in terms of admitting evidence. They are not, for the most part, very skeptical of police officers. They tend to find those police officers credible. So it's your client's word versus the police officer's word in terms of what happened. As a criminal defense lawyer, I think we all tend to think that the police officers slant their reports and to make them more favorable for the state. But we've got to rely on a judge or 12 people to realize that. And sometimes we don't have a lot to work with. But I think there's tremendous pressure within the system pushing people to plead, whether it be the fact that they have to keep on going to court, if it's the fact that they don't have enough money to pay their lawyer and their lawyer wants more money for a trial, that's a huge issue. Whether it's the fact that if they lose their trial, they will many times, have a much worse punishment than they would had they pled guilty. So there's a lot of risks with the trial. And so maybe what you're getting at is that we should, instead of focusing so much on encouraging people to plead guilty so that they get a reduced sentence, maybe that sentence should be, there shouldn't be such a high tax on them if they go to trial. Maybe, there should be more uniformity so that when you go to trial, you don't get, it's not such a big risk in terms of your sentence. But on the other hand, the state would argue that they have 100,000 cases a year, and that the only way that they can, manage those cases, they simply just can't try 100,000 cases a year.
Right.
So the only way that they can, manage this type of system is to offer people less time in exchange for not, for not making the state go through a jury trial.
And it's not even the idea of, oh, well, how about you take a class and we'll dismiss this case? It's not even there. It's more of, hey, well, we'll give him the time served, take his conviction. Well, how about he takes a class and does some community service and you don't give him that conviction versus you just have him take his guilty plea and pay a fine, where the outcome and the future life quality of that individual is staggeringly different from the person who took a class, did his community service, got his case dismissed, versus, and that very well might be the more just answer, versus, just have him plead guilty, pay a $200 fine, and time served, and he can get out.
Down the road. Yeah. Let's try and get a phone call in here before we get off the air. Hello, thanks for calling Reasonable Doubt.
Hey, I'd like to ask the panel if it's at all possible to tell the jury what the state offered in terms of a plea.
Sure.
And I think that could be of great benefit to a defense attorney who wants another tool in his toolbox.
Yeah, great question. Thanks for the call. And the answer to that is no. You're not allowed to discuss. And it goes both ways. That's the thing. You know, it cuts. There's a rule of evidence that precludes the admission of pretrial plea negotiations, and so it's good for the goose, good for the gander. You know, as a defense lawyer, you can't have the state admit that in, and likewise you can't admit it in. So,
well, could there be perhaps conjecture about in past trials how this came down?
I will. You're darn right. I'll put that conjecture all over the place. Well, I will do it everywhere.
And so, see, here's the thing. It gets even worse over in federal court because you can't even talk about punishment issues, period, in federal court because a jury is not allowed to even consider punishment. The federal judge is the only one who assesses punishment. So what a case is worth, what the offer was, what the potential punishment was, it never even comes close. You can try and get around it if there's cooperators, and you can kind of, if you can get in their plea agreement and show what they were exposed to, you can kind of wink, wink, nod, nod at the jury like, hey, this is what my guy's exposed to as well, and this guy cut a deal. But that's about as good as you're going to get over in the federal system. But yeah.
Okay, thanks.
You bet. Thanks for the call.
And going on what David was saying, and you were saying, when we're seating a jury, when we're talking to the veneer panel, we can say, would you make this guy a felon for less than a gram of certain substance? Would if it were proven that he had 2 prior pen trips, would you consider a minimum of 25 years?
Well, but that's only if you elect jury for punishment.
Right. Right. I agree.
That's another calculation that goes into this whole thing about the guilty plea issue is, you know, you have, and we only got 30 seconds left, but, you know, that's another calculation that goes into it is you have to make an election of punishment prior to going to trial. And you have to choose judge or jury. And so, you know, that's, there's so many things that go into it, and I found this an interesting website. If you want to go check it out, it's called guiltypleaproblem.org. You know, I don't know if any of the people who run this website watch the show or find us, but I'd love to talk to you. I might send you an email, see if we can get some of them on the show. But that's all the time we have for tonight, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank our guest, David Breston, for coming on. Appreciate you joining us tonight,
so much.
David. Yeah, we'll have to get you back on the show. And Julio, you keep up that protest, my friend.
Hey, I'm going to work on the goat.
Yeah.
That's when it goes up to 25%.
We're going to call it the Donald.
That'd be all right.
The Don Julio.
Yeah, I like it.
Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that's all we have for tonight's show. Please join us next week for another edition of A Reasonable Doubt. We'll see you. Good night.